we were planning this year's event, we knew that we would have a lot of conversation on decarbonization, in particular on electrification of transportation and on solar and wind plus storage. And we've also been seeing a lot happening on the building decarbonization front. So as the year progressed, we witnessed a host of cities in California pass legislation to decarbonize their building stock. In July, Berkeley, California became the first city in the U.S. to ban natural gas hookups in new low-rise buildings and homes. More recently, San Jose, the 10th largest city in the U.S., passed policies to encourage the move from natural gas to electricity. Other cities, from New York to Washington State, are beginning to join California. This is a huge transition. We'll see where it goes. But on this panel, we've got a great group of people to explore this topic. We've got Sue Gander from the National Governors Association to manage the conversation. I'll let her introduce the panelists, but I do have a story. This morning I was coming down for the conference, and Panama and I have not met yet. But I knew what he looked like, and there's a guy, you know, kind of in running gear, had a beard and mustache, and I'm like, okay, I don't know. So I'm like, are you Panama? And he goes, no. He goes, what's going on? I go, I'm going to have him on stage for a conversation shortly. And he said, oh, Panama Bartholomy? Yeah. So the guy was in the energy space and already knew you. So you're it's very cool. So guys, enjoy, and looking forward to it.
Thank you, Ron, and thanks to Steve and the Gridwise team here. I am really excited to have three great folks with us today to have this conversation about the decarbonization movement efforts that are happening within the building sector. We know this is happening in the transportation sector as well. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper in terms of what we're seeing on the ground, what kind of implications that's going to have for utility business models, talk a little bit about issues around fuel diversity and resiliency, and hopefully give you a sense of where this trend is heading and how all of you can be prepared and be a part of it. So we'll start off with a question to each of the three folks here. I'm going to introduce them in just a minute, and then we'll open it up to some group discussion, and then we'll save about 10 minutes at the end for questions from all of you. So please start thinking of those questions and be ready to jump up and raise your hand at the end there to get in with that. So it is great to have with me today Panama Bartholomy, who is known to many far and wide. He's the director of the Building Decarbonization Coalition, and one thing he wanted me to emphasize there is that is a really diverse set of stakeholders that he works with, from the utility sector, manufacturers, buildings, NGOs, and locals. We're going to hear a little bit more about his work. Then we will also hear from Mark Duvall, who's the Director of Energy Utilization at Electric Power Research Institute. Great to have you with us, Mark.
Thank you.
And Katie McGinty, who currently serves as Vice President for Global Government Relations at Johnson Controls. You may also know her from her leadership at the state and federal level as well. So really excited about this conversation. What I'll just add from the NGA perspective is that this is a trend that we have been seeing and tracking at the city level, but also at the state level as well, and getting more questions about this topic from states. We're currently in the throes of working with 4 states on different topics under a series of grid modernization retreats that we're hosting. And one of those states, Rhode Island, applied and was selected based on their interest in transforming the heating sector. Their governor, Raimondo, issued an executive order back in July with that goal. It's a fuel neutral goal, so it would involve conceivably electrification as well as efficiency on the gas side. Their utility, National Grid, who I think may be represented in the room, serves both of those, so that provides some opportunities there. And I was hoping to have reported back on that retreat because it was supposed to happen last week, but we had to push it out because of some weather issues. So we'll be having that in January, but really looking forward to that conversation and helping that state as they think through those issues and, you know, taking this conversation as well and helping other states as well. So I'm going to start off with this one question for each of them, but kind of the
first sort of intro comment I wanted to get is just your sense of affirming this trend that we're seeing, because we have this panel set up as like a question. Have we reached peak natural gas in buildings? Just maybe really quickly give your take on that before you kind of launch into your answer. So Panama, we'll start with you. We just heard about all the activity happening in California at the local level with the actions in Berkeley and San Jose and others. Can you just give us a little better sense of what's motivating this action? What are you hearing at the city level? And what's your view in terms of where this trend is heading?
Sure, Sue. So right now, building electrification is the fastest growing clean energy sector we've ever seen. By the middle of next year, 40% of Californians will live in a local jurisdiction that's adopted a building decarbonization policy. New York is quickly working on their policy. Minnesota, led by Fresh Energy, state of Colorado, state of Washington. We haven't seen faster growth in another clean energy technology than what we're seeing in this space right now. 23 cities in California have adopted a local building code to restrict the growth of the natural gas network. And Pacific Gas and Electric, one of our members, the 5th largest distributor of natural gas in the country, has been testifying at all these local government adoptions saying, we support any local government that wants to help us restrict the growth of our natural gas network. We know it doesn't fit with where California is going on climate, and we can't afford to maintain it out into the future. And so simply to Sue's question, why are local governments doing it? Most of these local governments have climate action plans. And when you look at the portfolio of the emissions and where they're coming from, in the state, it's about 2/3 of our emissions are coming from buildings and transportation. For most local governments, it's 90%. And local governments don't have a lot of control over cars. What they do have control over is buildings. And so if we're looking at natural gas, as you heard, we're moving to 100% renewable electricity, and so gas is really the outlier here. Gas right now, this year, became the #1 pollution source for greenhouse gas emissions for the United States. And so if you look at where local governments are going to be able to use some of their authority and some of their power, it's going to be focused in on buildings. And so we're expecting the city of San Francisco, city of LA, county of LA, Sacramento, all by about July of next year to be adopting similar policies. And I think the last thing I'll say here is what'll be fascinating to watch is California and New York are the 2 largest users of natural gas in the country. The Midwest, obviously a large user. What is the ripple effect on the natural gas industry from the largest users suddenly stopping the expansion, starting to affect the stock prices of the very utilities that rely upon the infrastructure expansion for their returns? When do we start to see the ripple effects of that on the full supply chain of the natural gas industry?
Excellent, thank you. Thanks for kind of seeding a bunch of conversations we're going to have later as well about things like stranded assets and kind of what does this imply for utility business models. Let's shift a little bit to Mark. Mark, I want to have you answer the question about have we reached peak natural gas. I kind of already know your answer, but I want you to share it with folks here. And then from your vantage point.
Well, maybe I changed it.
You might have, I don't know. At EPRI, what does this mean specifically in terms of the different technologies that are going to be coming into play? Can you talk a little bit about that? And then if you want to say anything about utility business models, just give us a sense of.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So if you look across our economy and you look at commercial, industrial, residential, transportation as 4 sectors in our economy, the most electrified right now, today, is commercial. Right? Commercial buildings, they're the most highly electrified of all of those.
Yeah.
Industrial and transportation is the least, industrial's next, and residential. And so one of the reasons, one of the things that, and we were having one of our electrification symposia in Berkeley the week the city council made that decision. We had nothing to do with it, maybe it was just karma. So the vast majority of the technologies that you need as a city to go in a different direction, to make a choice, okay? And we spend a lot of time inside EPRI debating this idea of cities as customers. So electrification is all about the customer, and cities are sort of this mega customer. They represent all of their residents, which are customers of different energy options, and they get to make planning and purchasing and policy decisions. And as Panama pointed out, they have a lot of influence, a lot more influence over buildings than they do some of the other segments. So really, almost everything out there still it already exists. It's already off the shelf. We need a lot of different product mixes. There's a lot of different logistical issues, but you're really looking at something that can be done. So if you go make that choice, it's a less risky choice than saying, hey, from now on, no one can buy anything but an electric car. That might fly in Santa Clara County a little bit, but when you get to the point of actual energy consumption, like how does the energy portfolio evolve over time? That's just something that you see off in the horizon before you actually see it in real life. Like when we looked at the first solar panels back in the day, or the first wind turbines. And in fact, if you want to see the first wind turbines, just drive through California. Those old ones are still there, right next to the brand new ones. And you could say, this is going to be big someday, a lot longer, well before it actually is big. Electric vehicles, I would say, are at that crux right now. You can see it. You can see electric vehicle technology expand into all these different applications way beyond passenger cars. But is it really affecting gasoline consumption right now? You can see it coming, but it's not there yet. So a couple things that I think we're excited about in buildings. I think 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we're going to look back and say what were the two key technologies of the next decade. Electric vehicles and then heat pumps, 1 and 2 or 2 and 1. Heat pump technology is still evolving rapidly in its performance. It can handle wider and wider temperature ranges. Efficiency is still going up. So it's just an immensely promising technology. I think most important is it's starting to reach applications over and above kind of the baseline. Hey, you can go buy a heat pump water heater. Maybe, if you're lucky, you can go buy a heat pump water and you're diligent. There's a few models. There's not a lot there. You can buy heat pump furnaces. You can do all these things. I think as you see that expand into more and more applications, you see them go into heat recovery, you see them go into large heat pumps, potentially competitors for commercial and industrial boilers. We've got some small unit technology for apartments, hotel rooms, et cetera, that we're working with some companies that's just phenomenal. So I think you just have to watch this. It's going to get better and better, and it's going to open up more and more avenues as to how we're going to kind of get some of these decarbonization goals accomplished and get some of these electrification goals done without brute forcing it. Right now you can go to places like, hey, you go to Quebec, it's a predominantly electrically heated system because of their vast hydro network. But it was developed as a brute force technique. Same thing in the Tennessee Valley Authority. There's a lot of electric-only communities out there, or electric-dominant communities. But going forward, we're going to do it much more intelligently, and I think that's very exciting. And I'll leave you with one warning, that a lot of it will come down to how much success we achieve in the next 10 years will come down to some really boring blocking and tackling. Like are we able to cost effectively scale retrofits? Are we able to come up with low and moderate income solutions that make sense at scale, past the demonstration? I can show you great demonstrations for all these things, but can we get really to scale where you're not doing a community, or you're not just focusing on new built homes, but you're going back and upgrading your existing stock at a meaningful rate? Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Katie, let's hear from you. JCI, they're a leader, as we know, in building electrification and efficiency for both natural gas and electricity. What's your take as part of the industry on what's going on in California, other states, Colorado, Minnesota, et cetera? And do you have a sense, or a crystal ball you can offer up in terms of the landscape for the next, say, 5 to 10 years? What are you seeing?
Sure, easy question, no problem.
Yeah, just snap your fingers, let us know.
Actually, I think
10 years and we'll check on you.
well, thank you, so. And I think the comments already shared have been incredibly insightful. I would add to some of the statistics. We do see, again, California being a trendsetter, but two things. One, the entire country of the UK has said no more natural gas hookups in residences post-2025. That's right around the corner. And having just returned from China, there the direction and the motivation, the push was a little bit different. It is mostly about shutting down old coal-fired power plants, but the impact and effect is the same, essentially banning fossil fuel in those residents and commercial enterprises. So the trends are big. Peak, maybe. Let me step back a little bit, or I guess before I do, I also want to pick up on something that Panama said, which to me is such joy to my ears, and that Mark reinforced, which is that buildings are in the mix. Buildings are front and center. Amen, hallelujah. If there's any...
Buildings are fun again.
They're fun. Might be block and tackle, but fun. But if there's any silver lining to the absence of leadership in this town, if it has led cities to embrace buildings, that's a good thing. How many times have we all said, look at all that energy efficiency opportunity just out there to be grabbed and run with, and it never seems to happen, but it is starting to happen. Maybe bridging from that, and to get more to Johnson Controls specifically, so as we look out over the next 10 years, for us it's about three things. It's about electrification, it's about digitalization, and it's about decarbonization. And one major just big business push from that perspective with those as our guiding themes that I wanted to share. For those of you who followed Johnson Controls over the years, we are very much an automotive player as much as we were an efficiency and buildings player. We have totally divested all of those automotive assets. We are now, as of just a month or two ago, pure play buildings technology company. So that should give you some indication of what we see as the future and the trajectory. So we are, but we increasingly want to be totally about smart buildings, smart communities, conceiving of and executing around buildings going from just a dead weight on your balance sheet, just an energy consumer, to a flexible, agile energy asset itself. Second thing, as we look at these trends, I think this is Mark's point. We have been putting some pieces of the equation together in projects we're very proud of. So to give you a flavor, University of Maui, for example, we always start with energy efficiency, after major energy efficiency push to take down the demand of the campus, 40%, that campus is now first university 100% renewable on the campus, so behind the meter. One piece of the equation. Second piece of the equation, a project called the BIHA project, which is a leading environmental engineering company in the Middle East. We're building their new headquarters. Second part of the equation, it will be state-of-the-art in terms of intercommunication among technologies, devices, and equipment, all driven by AI and machine learning inside that building. And then third piece of the equation, Stanford University that we worked with, got rid of the old CHP plant, 20 to 50% increase in efficiency of the whole campus. But the real innovation and add to the equation there, it is totally bidirectionally communicatable with the grid, and it is run on the basis of 7-day forecasts in terms of weather and energy prices. However, and last thing I'll just say, and we'll get into all these, I'm sure, soon, again, they are projects. In our estimation, to scale up, we really need hard drive in at least 3 directions. On the technology side, a lot of this stuff is still buggy, I'll just say, and we can get into that, but smoother communication among all of this technology and equipment is essential. Second, in terms of, Sue, I think you were getting to this, business models. We need whole new business models, and there's just one example. We need the Sun Edisons and the sun runs to invent an equivalent in this space where we can be aggregating these kinds of interventions and selling them back to the grid, financing through leasing models, et cetera. And then finally, we need rules and regulations. I was with our CEO on Capitol Hill yesterday. Oh, delight my heart when he says, we think regulations are good. Yay. But we do need regulation around energy efficiency, and certainly in terms of the wholesale and retail electricity grids, recognizing these assets as generation equivalent assets, enabling utility balance sheets to be put to work, et cetera, et cetera. But technology, business models, and new think around regulations to really get to the scale implied, I think, in the prompt.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for those, both the case studies, examples, but also the adding in kind of that international perspective, because it isn't just in the U.S., and that's important for the market as well. So we're going to go and kind of dig a little bit deeper into some of these topics, and then again, leave a chance for you all to jump in. Bartholomew brought up a bit kind of where we're seeing action, California, New York, a few other states, mainly kind of the coasts with, I'll throw Colorado and Minnesota in, but it certainly isn't across the whole landscape. So wanted to get a better sense of, where do you see things moving more quickly, and then what does this mean in terms of the regional implications, maybe getting at a little bit of, some of the shifts that we're going to see in some states maybe going, full in on this and other states not. So, where do you see this happening next? And, what does that mean in terms of the market on a regional basis? Jump in.
Yeah.
Anyone can jump in on that.
I'll start. So I rattled off those states who are really leading. One of the big drivers for California right now is our rates. Historically, natural gas has been really cheap compared to electricity. We have two major gas utilities in California. Southern California Gas Company just got a 23% rate increase approved by our Public Utilities Commission. Pacific Gas and Electric just got a 24% rate increase approved. Southern California Gas Company had asked for a 45% rate increase over the next 3 years. And the reason being is we're having a much different conversation around safety of our infrastructure than we've ever had after the San Bruno explosion on the peninsula just below San Francisco. We've taken a new look and realized just how hard it is to maintain a natural gas network in a seismically active state like California. And so the cost issue is really starting to become front and center. It costs about an extra $7,000 to $15,000 to bring gas to a home compared to an all-electric home. And in a state like California, with the housing crisis that we have, we're looking for every way to cut every dollar off of the upfront cost of a house. And so if we have an opportunity to be able to shave $15,000 off the cost of a house, because we're already bringing the electricity to the house. So if we can find a way to shave off those costs, we're looking for every opportunity there, and local governments are now starting to get a better handle on that. New York is putting together an almost 200-page action plan for building decarbonization, and I think they're going to quickly shoot right beyond California. All the action in California is at the local level right now on this, and I think the state, with NYSERDA's work, they're in the development of their action plan right now, is just going to shoot right by us. And so I think those are really the two states to watch. And then Seattle was on the verge of adopting a ban on new gas hookups. They ran afoul of labor. They didn't do a good rollout, and so I think Seattle will be the next big wave that we're going to see that we haven't mentioned yet.
Can I just build on what Panama was just saying? So the other headline out of California, in addition to the tragedy that you mentioned, was also the horrifying headline, 10 years of rolling blackouts to be expected in California because of the wildfire issue, which to me is just, if we don't have a clarion call with that we upgrade the grid, finally get to those kinds of investments. But I think as we see this electrification trend unfold, the last darn thing any of us want to see is that it unfolds in a disaster because we throw a whole bunch of load on a grid that's having a hard time keeping up with the current load. So a couple of things, again, coming back to efficiency first, just got to bring down, when there are numbers cost effectively to be able to cut 40 and 50% out of existing buildings, in particular, to just take that out of the system, really an imperative as we're adding this a new demand to the grid. But I think also, and maybe Mark, this gets into the weeds and stuff I know you're following, but also underscores the importance of distributed energy resources being fully recognized, fully valued. I come from a restructured state where we just can't get out of our own way in terms of this debate about can a utility invest in or have any ownership around a generating asset. Do batteries and storage constitute a generating asset or not? Look, there's private dollars in this space for sure, but the utility balance sheet's a pretty cost-effective balance sheet too. So to be able to unleash any and all ability to have those grid edge resources fired up and operating and helping to carry some of the load on a grid, that certainly needs a bit of a facelift, to say the least.
So it was good to hear you say that some of the connectivity technology in these buildings is still buggy. We thought it was just us. We thought it was just our pilots the only one that have these problems. So I think there's a couple things. I'll probably end with what evolution of utility business model, but then I'm going to veer back over to the electric vehicle side and out myself as originally an electric vehicle researcher, posing as a building decarb researcher today, is that a couple things are kind of, obviously the resiliency piece is totally core to all this. I live in a coastal town in California. I went through 2 public safety power shutoffs. I believe I averted the 3rd one because I had the generator fully safely wired in. I was completely ready for the 3rd planned outage, which meant reverse Murphy's Law. It didn't need to happen because I was ready. So, so resiliency is going to be really core to all of this. I am skeptical that we've hit on that solution yet. I mean, we're throwing lots of stuff against the wall right now in California. And accelerated energy storage programs for vulnerable residents, looking at microgrids. We're doing a lot of things, but we're probably not there yet. And we're certainly not where we have to be if you're asking major companies like a Walmart to not only electrify all their buildings, electrify their fleets. In other words, if we're going to go mass electrification, we have a lot more work to do. I think we need to rethink distributed generation. We need to rethink actually internal combustion engine-based backup generation. I don't think it goes away. I think we have to rethink it. So I think that those are all things you have to address if you're going to continue to just push for more and more all-electric customers. If that's the end, if that's where this goes, then resiliency becomes more and more important. California kind of cracked the code in the last few years on utility business models to accelerate customer electrification on the electric vehicle side. Lots of programs, 9-figure programs, multiple versions where the investor-owned utilities go in and own assets on the customer side of the meter, put on their own transformer, the idea, and move a lot of these things over to more patient capital. I'm not going to comment on where that might go next, but we're starting to see those examples. They're fairly large. They're relatively easy to scale. I'm not saying anything's that big is always easy, but the key is there. And so when you come back to resiliency, flexibility, and adoption, 3 of your largest problems, they all tie around, can you upgrade the customer's electrical system to handle all 3 of these, and the local distribution system in tandem at scale at lower cost. So that to me is the analogy, that's the thing, to me that is what is analogous to what's happening in California and other states on the electric vehicle side from the utilities perspective. There's that core interface, which is where most of the impacts come, local distribution system to the customer's electric system. That's kind of the core. You figure out how to upgrade those at scale where needed, and then a lot of this other stuff becomes a lot easier.
So
I didn't know that, by the way, that it's more on the distribution than the transmission side where the most weaknesses are?
One of the things, when we drive a home to all electric, so if we go talk residential, we drive a residential community to all electric, peak demand of each home goes up. Peak demand goes up if they usually have solar, so energy consumption goes down. So we want to try, we're working on how to address that with flexibility, but keep in mind a lot of these really efficient appliances, like heat pump water heaters, the water heater, the electric water heater used to be the greatest DR device in the residential world by far. I've had utilities say that is one of the cores of their DR programs, a hill they would die on to preserve that resource. Heat pump water heaters pretty much take that away. They convert that into maybe a couple hundred watts in the winter, less in the summer. So
Because they're so efficient.
for the right reason, they're really efficient, which means you have to find other resources. The electric vehicle, you have to, the electric vehicle, pool pumps, spas, pre-cooling, you have to take care of all those things, but you still have to do work on the distribution system. And as long as we're not driving up the cost of service with that work, then that's work that will and should be done. And once again, pop back over the electric vehicle side just very briefly. The early assessments of California are that electric vehicles are not causing rates to go up on the utility side. In fact, they believe there's slightly downward pressure.
Yeah.
I'd like a few more years before I say that in my outdoor voice, but I think that it's certainly far, far from the sky is not falling. There's a benefit there. I think we can continue to build upon that benefit.
Yeah, and that is actually a good point maybe to dig into a little bit more. I feel like the last conversation was really helpful in terms of thinking about the resiliency aspects of this, because there is a counter argument that's been made, and I know we've talked about how it can be disputed that this shift to one fuel source, may expose people to, some vulnerabilities. But what I heard is efficiency, grid upgrades, including the distribution grid, backup generators, and storage. Maybe a few other, I don't know, I missed something, but kind of thinking about that combination alongside the push towards electrification.
We have a fair number of electric-dominant regions in this country because that's how they were originally developed. The Tennessee Valley Authority, most of the Southeast. Part of that is due to climate, but so we're here. We're here. It's a matter of if you're going to expand the percentage of our economy the electric system serves, it's obvious that resiliency has to also follow. You need a plan B always.
Yeah. And it may be too early to tell with the shifts that are happening in California and elsewhere, but what's your sense of what the trend on the home side is going to be, or the building side, I should say, around utility rates? How should we be thinking about that? This kind of gets into maybe new rate designs that can help spread things around in a better way, or just kind of rationalize them more.
Quick trivia question.
The equipment person can answer that.
Quick trivia question. I started work at EPRI in 2001. What was the buzzword about rates that I heard every day when I was in the office, when I was coming to work?
2001.
2001.
No, that wasn't the death spiral one, though.
It was, I heard a lot about Enron, but no, what was the buzzword about rates? Where were rates going?
They're going.
Prices to devices.
Oh, yeah, prices to devices.
Yeah, and real-time pricing was there as well, too. It's interesting because I just got a letter from my utility, and I'm on the EV time of use rate, and it used to be 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. for the lowest rate. They're now shifting it from 11 p.m. to midnight. That's fine. I've got young kids. I've been asleep for hours until then, Embarrassing number of hours between. from 12 a.m. to 3 p.m. That's now the lowest. That's now the lowest time of use rate in PG&E's EV time of use rate plan. So they're basically acknowledging the entire everything that we've been seeing this morning. That we're going to encourage you to. And so what I did is I went to my spouse and I said, it is obvious that we need to buy another electric vehicle to park at home to charge from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. because while we don't have solar, I want to help. I want to help the grid. And her response was, we don't need a fourth electric vehicle. I would like to let some other folks talk about rates a little bit more, but it's clear that rates are a big issue. Rates have always been something that followed, rates are a kind of a slower time response way of dealing with different issues. I also think that as fancy as my colleagues at EPRI over decades wanted to be with rate prices to devices, real-time pricing, all of these things, I'm sure now we're talking about AI routines, et cetera. You can get a lot done by effectively implementing a relatively simple rate. Like we got a lot done just putting EVs on time of use rates without resorting to smart charging and things that were technologically complicated. So I think we have to ask ourselves, what's the right rate? What are the right rate structures? But how fancy do we actually need to get? Is it about having really sophisticated pricing mechanisms? Is it about having really good implementation of, and I'm thinking about the residential customers here. With commercial buildings, we can just buy a bunch of Katie's hardware and configure, and this thing will do loop-de-loops and it'll be great. I'm thinking of on the residential side, what is the right approach there? Do we want to be complicated, or do we want to complex, sophisticated, simpler, easier to implement, great implementation? If you look in Arizona, where they have these obvious reasons for time of use pricing, they've had some really good results from simple sort of notched rate designs where you just incentivize people to pre-cool their houses and to let the temperature rise over the day and then blast the AC on after they hit the peak. And I think that what we know is that we need to know a lot more about this. We're not there yet.
I'm gonna
Can I
ask.
put a plug in for something? So everything, or pretty much everything that we've been talking about is no new hookups. I mean, back to the subject at hand, for new residences or new commercial enterprises. So sitting here in the District of Columbia, I just wanted to do a high five to the local government, also now followed by a number of both states and other cities, in terms of this truly very significant retrofit obligation for existing buildings. The numbers are real, significant, pretty massive reductions that are required, and most of these new initiatives are designed in an ever more virtuous cycle, so that they start with a baseline of what's the average efficiency today. You need to improve it by X%, but then every 5 years, that baseline is changed on the basis that you already have upgraded and you continue in that direction. As it relates to rate structures, I think I touched on it in my opening comments. Certainly time of use rates are critical, but I don't know about you, but it just makes me feel like that little emoji where the thing's head blows off, where, well, the only way that we enable utilities to make money is if they build big new power plants and transmission and distribution lines. So therefore, because we need utilities in the game, we've got to build power plants and T&D. I'm open to a lot of ways where they can stay in business. But for goodness sakes, most, if not all, the initiatives we're talking about here pay for themselves. There are a lot of ways to make the lights go on without hitting up the ratepayers, and in fact, to the contrary.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've got a few questions actually, based on what you've heard here, but I don't want to monopolize all the time. So we're going to give you all a
There aren't a lot of people talking about how important energy efficiency is, so I would say we let her go. Let her keep going.
Yeah. Right there, right back at you. Questions? Got a couple in the front
Just
here.
a couple minutes, not too long.
Excellent, all right.
Okay, so really
Short
last
questions.
one. I mean, I appreciate the comment you made about the district. I guess one question I have on the gas side is, where do you go in this balance of investing money in the gas system to reduce leakage? If you're
Right.
dealing with mitigation.
Safety, yeah.
Right.
And then sinking costs into a gas distribution system when you're trying to do
Yeah.
decarbonization
Yeah.
20 years from now with no gas being distributed at all. So how do you balance that? I mean, or does anybody have any creative thoughts on what's the right amount to invest to reduce leakage before you say, okay, no, we'll let it leak because we're gonna get rid of it anyway?
I can tell you the most creative solution I've seen proposed. It's the North of UK project you can download. They're actually proposing to convert 3 million customers, I think it's 3 million customers, don't quote me on that, in Northern England over to retail hydrogen. So I will not comment further on that, but it's certainly worth a read of their preliminary study of how they would do it and what it would be involved in.
So does that imply using the gas?
They would convert, so think about your natural gas system, all the appliances, all the
Yeah.
plumbing in the houses, all the meters, everything, 100% hydrogen.
100% upgrades.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's, well, I think, you know, that's a huge, obviously a huge issue. I'm just gonna tell you the most creative out there solution I've seen on how to address it.
Yeah. PG&E is really your best partner right now to talk to about this. And what it looks like is we're going to have to be investing in the safety of the natural gas grid up until the very day we turn it off. And
non-negotiable.
we're going to need a gold-plated system up until that point. And so what PG&E, they've done about 2 years of really planning around this right now. And what they've come to is we need to be trimming off whole branches at a time. And their worst case scenario is Bob at the end of the cul-de-sac that doesn't want to give up his gas stove. And that they need to run a gas system and charge everybody, this is a quote from one of their executives to me, that we're going to have to charge everybody $180 a month just to run a gas system so everybody can cook with gas. But we've already switched over all of their heating systems. And so for them, they're looking at, we need to do whole branches at a time. And we just released a new report in California that looked at a non-strategic wind down of the gas system versus a strategic. And it's about $150 billion of difference from a strategic wind down of the gas system to a non-strategic wind down. And so
Which one do you think we should pick?
for once, let's go with strategic. Yeah.
Yeah, oh, thank you. That sounds like a really interesting report, too. And there was one more question here, and I think we might have to wrap it up because we're running a
Yeah,
little late.
sort of
Sorry.
related to Susan's question.
Yeah.
I heard this morning a couple of times, California is kind of on the edge as far as energy innovation. I think the Europeans are far ahead of any of us, especially when it comes to thinking about what one of the first keynote speakers said today, which is how do we take excess wind energy off-peak, create hydrogen, synthesize hydrogen, mix it with carbon, let's create a green gas, so to speak. We can also create blue gas using carbon capture and storage and utilization, and also biomethane from landfills. So my question is, are these California municipal policymakers even considering this transition issue in order to avoid a lot of stranded costs of the existing distribution networks? Because, yeah, maybe we're saving $15,000 per house by not hooking up gas, but California policymakers wipe that out by saying, well, you've got to put solar panels on them instead. So, I mean, are they considering any future that includes green gas at all?
Yeah. How many economists in the room? And all you have to do is just study it at some point. A minor in economics or up.
3.
So, what?
It's not 4.
4, okay.
Yeah.
Good room,
All
good room.
disagree on everything.
Go ahead.
So I think that I want to go back in time, become an economist, and tackle this exact problem, because they're proposing a lot of these things still have a considerable amount of technical risk to them. Considerable amount of technical risk. So if we want to look at things like, PV, wind, offshore wind, lithium-ion batteries, electric vehicles, we've driven a lot of the technical uncertainty out of these categories of technologies. In other words, we know where they're going and we know how they're going to get there. And there's still some things that we don't know. I didn't know that, Seattle was going to declare or Washington was going to declare they were going to electrify their ferry system. I would have never guessed that 3 years ago. So, we're still going to be surprised. But I think it's going to be more like we're going to be pleasantly surprised at technological advances in this area and where they're going to take us. A lot of these things still have considerable technical risk to them. And so trying to make an economics-based determination over something that is still technically, I think, not quite resolved, I think is really the crux. And Europe is much more comfortable, I think. So I'll make a second comment and then I'll turn it back over, which is that compressed air energy storage with underground air stores is a proven, reliable, robust technology for bulk energy storage. We did a lot of research on it at EPRI. There's one in Germany, there's one in Alabama. The one in Alabama is still working today. Some of these things that we're proposing out here, this is the natural stepping stone, and not that many people are talking about it. So that's the part that kind of concerns me, is that there are technological aspects to this. There are things we can do today. You can go build a CASE plant today, and you can bulk store excess renewables, yet no one's really talking about that. We're talking about we're going to make hydrogen out of all of it, and then we're going to store the hydrogen and then make electricity out of all of it. And obviously, we're going to spend a considerable amount of time looking at that option. It's a very promising one, but it's still, the uncertainty there for the goals that we have in 2030 should give us second thoughts as we work on things like energy efficiency and better load centers and better controls that we can do now in this room. Thank you.
Well, we're going to have to end it here. This was a fantastic discussion. Thank you for your questions. I know there were many more, and I think these folks will be around. So Katie, Mark, Panama, thank you, and myself. Thank you so much.